I should have known something was wrong when Patricia insisted on house sitting while we were in Florida. In the 3 years since my husband David died, my mother-in-law had never volunteered to help with anything related to my children or our home. She'd made her feelings crystal clear at the funeral reception when she told anyone who would listen that I was too young and irresponsible to raise her grandchildren alone. But when I mentioned our week-long trip to Disney World, Patricia practically demanded the house keys. Those children need to learn responsibility, she'd said, adjusting her designer pearls with the same theatrical gesture she used whenever dispensing unwanted wisdom. I raised 4 successful children, and I know what's best for them. My 8-year-old twins, Jake and Sophie, had been bouncing off the walls with excitement about their first real vacation since their father's death. I'd saved for 2 years to make it happen, working double shifts at the investment firm where I managed portfolios for high-net-worth clients. What Patricia didn't know, what none of David's family knew, was that my expertise in alternative investments had made me quite comfortable financially. I preferred keeping my wealth private, especially around people who had already decided I was a gold-digging widow. The flight home from Orlando had been delayed by 3 hours, and both kids were exhausted as we pulled into our driveway at nearly midnight. Jake was asleep against my shoulder while Sophie rubbed her eyes and complained about being hungry. All I wanted was to tuck them into their familiar beds and collapse myself. The front door was unlocked, which should have been my first warning. Patricia sat at my kitchen table, still wearing her church clothes despite the late hour, with neat stacks of cash arranged in front of her like she was conducting some kind of business transaction. She looked up when we walked in, her expression showing neither surprise nor guilt. "You're finally back," she said, as if we'd been gone for months instead of a week. "I hope you enjoyed your little vacation." "Patricia, what are you doing here so late?" I asked, shifting Jake's weight in my arms. "We weren't expecting you to wait up." She gestured to the money on the table with obvious satisfaction. "I've been having quite a productive week, actually, making some necessary changes around here." Something cold settled in my stomach, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "What kind of changes?" "Why don't you put the children to bed first?" Patricia suggested, her tone implying this was more of a command than a suggestion. "Then we can have an adult conversation about their future." I carried Jake upstairs, Sophie trudging behind me, and pushed open the door to Jake's room. The sight that greeted me made my blood freeze. The room was completely empty. His twin bed, dresser, toy chest, bookshelf, everything was gone. Even the blue curtains I'd sewn myself were missing, leaving bare windows that looked somehow obscene in the darkness. "Mommy?" Sophie whispered, pressing against my side. "Where's Jake's stuff?" I set Jake down gently, my hands shaking as I flipped on the light switch. The empty room looked enormous without furniture, the hardwood floors echoing our footsteps. On the wall where Jake's headboard used to sit, there were darker rectangles on the paint where his favorite superhero posters had hung. "Sophie, go check your room, honey," I managed to say, though I already knew what she would find. Her scream confirmed it. I rushed across the hall to find her standing in another empty room, her hands pressed to her mouth in shock. Her white canopy bed, the one David had assembled for her 6th birthday, was gone. So was her dresser, her bookshelf, her desk, even the special lamp we'd bought together that projected stars on the ceiling. "Mommy, where is everything?" Sophie's voice was small and scared, the kind of fear I hadn't heard from her since the months after David's funeral. "Where are all my things?" I knelt down and pulled both children close, my mind racing as I tried to process what Patricia had done. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure how. "We'll figure this out." Jake was fully awake now, looking around his empty room with the kind of confusion that breaks a parent's heart. "Did someone rob us, Mommy?" "No, sweetheart. Nobody robbed us." I stood up, feeling something cold and determined settling in my chest. "Why do we both sleep in my room tonight? We'll sort everything out in the morning." After getting unsettled in my bed, I walked back downstairs with deliberate calm. Patricia was still sitting at the kitchen table, now sorting the cash into a small leather purse. She looked up when I entered, her expression showing mild annoyance, as if I was interrupting something important. "I suppose you saw the bedrooms," she said, continuing to count bills without looking at me directly. "Patricia." I kept my voice level, though every instinct screamed at me to demand answers immediately. "Where is my children's furniture?" She finally looked up, her eyes showing that familiar combination of superiority and condescension I'd endured for years. I sold it, along with all those excessive toys and unnecessary electronics. She gestured dismissively toward the stairs. Children don't need all these expensive possessions cluttering their lives. I should know. I raised 4 children who all turned out to be productive adults. I stared at her, trying to process the casual way she just admitted to selling my children's belongings. You sold their furniture, without asking me. Without asking permission, Patricia corrected, as if that were an important distinction. David always said I had excellent judgment about these things. Those children were getting spoiled, sleeping on $1,000 mattresses and playing with toys that cost more than some people make in a month. It's not healthy. Those weren't your belongings to sell, Patricia. She waved her hand dismissively, the same gesture she used whenever someone challenged her authority. Technically, this house belongs to the family trust that David set up. I'm the executor of that trust, which gives me certain responsibilities and privileges. She pulled out a folded paper from her purse. I had every legal right to make decisions about excessive and unnecessary expenditures. I felt something snap inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Years of managing million-dollar portfolios had taught me that the biggest mistakes happen when emotions override strategy, and the money from selling their belongings will be put to better use, Patricia said, continuing to organize the cash. I'm thinking about a nice educational trip for them to visit their cousins in Minnesota. Children need to learn about family values, not materialism. You know what, Patricia? You're absolutely right about one thing. She paused, clearly surprised by my agreeable tone. I'm glad you're finally seeing reason. Children do need to learn about real value. I continued, walking to my briefcase and pulling out a manila folder I'd been carrying for months. And sometimes adults need to learn about consequences. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she watched me open the folder. What's that supposed to mean? I pulled out the first document, a mortgage assignment notification I'd been holding onto for the right moment. Do you remember last year when you were complaining about your mortgage payments? How you said the bank was being unreasonable about your late payments? What does that have to do with anything? Well, you mentioned that some investment company had bought your mortgage debt. You were quite upset about it, as I recall. I set the document on the table where her cash had been. You said they were probably going to foreclose on hard-working families just to make a profit. Patricia glanced down at the paper, and I saw the exact moment she recognized her address in the legal description. Her face went very pale. That's my mortgage information. How do you have that? Because I'm the investment company that bought your debt, Patricia. I pulled out another document, this one showing 6 months of missed payments. Mountain Vista Investment Group. That's my company. I've been buying distressed mortgage debt in this area for about 2 years now. She stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. Actually, I do. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app showing my business account balance. I've been managing investment portfolios for some very wealthy clients for the past 12 years. I learned a lot about alternative investments, including distressed debt acquisition. Patricia grabbed the mortgage documents, scanning them frantically. This says you've owned my mortgage for 8 months. That can't be right. 8 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days to be exact. I sat down across from her, feeling strangely calm despite the enormity of what I was about to do. I bought it right after you told the children they couldn't come to your Easter dinner because I couldn't afford to bring the right kind of wine. You're lying. But her voice shook slightly, and I could see her doing the math in her head, remembering all the times she'd dismissed me as a struggling single mother. I pulled out the final document, a foreclosure notice I'd had prepared but never intended to use. Until tonight. According to the payment history, you're currently 4 months behind on your mortgage. The total amount due, including late fees and legal costs, is $68,412. Patricia's hands were shaking as she looked at the foreclosure notice. You can't do this. David wouldn't want you to hurt his family. David also wouldn't want his mother to sell his children's belongings without permission. I stood up, taking back the documents. But you're right about one thing. David wouldn't want me to hurt his family. That's why I've been patient for so long. What do you want? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I pulled out my phone and showed her a furniture website I'd bookmarked. I want every single item you sold replaced with something equivalent or better. I want it delivered and set up before the children wake up tomorrow morning. That's impossible. The stores aren't even open, and I don't have. I've already contacted an emergency furniture service. They specialize in situations like this. I had actually called them from the airport during our layover, as soon as I got Patricia's smug text about making improvements to the house. It costs extra for overnight delivery and setup, but that's not really my problem. Patricia stared at me. How did you know what I'd done? You sent me a text message, remember? Something about teaching the children valuable lessons while I was spoiling them in Florida. I pulled up the message on my phone. You seemed quite proud of yourself. She had the grace to look embarrassed. I thought you'd understand eventually. The furniture replacement will cost approximately $12,000, I continued. Which, coincidentally, is about what you made from selling their belongings. I don't have $12,000. I know. That's why you're going to use the money you made from selling their furniture, and you're going to take out a loan for the difference. I handed her a business card for a lending company I'd researched. They offer same-day approval for qualified applicants. Patricia looked at the card like it might bite her. And if I can't get approved? Then we proceed with the foreclosure, I said matter-of-factly, without emotion. Your choice. The furniture delivery truck arrived at 6:30 the next morning, just as I was making breakfast for Jake and Sophie. They pressed their faces to the kitchen window, watching in amazement as uniformed workers carried bed frames and dressers up the front steps. Is that for us? Sophie asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Yes, sweetheart. Everything is being put back. By 9 o'clock, both bedrooms were fully furnished with new beds, dressers, desks, and even some toys and books to replace what had been sold. The workers had been incredibly efficient, setting everything up exactly where the original furniture had been. Patricia arrived just as the delivery truck was pulling away. She looked exhausted, and I suspected she'd been up all night making phone calls and filling out loan applications. She handed me a receipt showing payment in full for the furniture replacement. The lending company approved me, she said quietly. Barely, but they approved me. Good. I folded the receipt carefully. The children are upstairs if you want to see their rooms. She climbed the stairs slowly, and I heard Sophie's excited voice explaining all the new furniture to her grandmother. When Patricia came back down, her eyes were red-rimmed. They seemed happy with everything, she said. They're resilient kids. They get that from their father. Patricia nodded, twisting her purse strap nervously. About the mortgage. What about it? Are you going to foreclose anyway? Now that you've made your point. I consider the question seriously. That depends entirely on you, Patricia. I bought your mortgage because I wanted to understand what was making you so angry all the time. Turns out, financial stress makes people do terrible things to the people they're supposed to love. I do love them, she said quickly. I love Jake and Sophie more than anything. Then show them that love by treating their mother with respect. I handed her a payment coupon book I had prepared. Your payment schedule has been restructured. Lower monthly payments, extended term, fixed interest rate. Much more manageable. Patricia stared at the payment book. Why would you do that? Because David would want his mother to be secure and his children to have a relationship with their grandmother. But that relationship depends on you changing how you treat us. She opened the payment book, scanning the new terms. This is very generous. It's what family does for each other, I said. Real family. Over the following weeks, something shifted in our relationship. Patricia still offered unsolicited advice, but there was less venom in it. She stopped making comments about my parenting and started asking questions instead. When Jake mentioned wanting to join Little League, she offered to take him shopping for equipment instead of lecturing about the dangers of competitive sports. 6 months later, Patricia started working as my office manager. She'd sold her house and moved into a smaller condo that better fit her actual budget, using the equity to pay off her other debts. The children visited her every other weekend, and she'd learned to ask about their interests instead of trying to change them. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes the most important victories aren't about proving you were right all along. Sometimes they're about creating space for people to become who they were meant to be, even when they've lost their way. The night she sold my children's furniture was the night everything changed, but not in the way either of us expected. Instead of destroying our relationship, it forced us to finally have honest conversations about money, respect, and what it really means to be family.